As we now have a quorum, I call the meeting to order. We are now in public session. Very much want to welcome Professor Mark Ferguson, Director General of Science Foundation Ireland. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson, for coming. We hugely are appreciative of you taking the time. It's a hugely important issue. No apologies have been received. We're looking at the report of the COVID-19 Rapid Testing Group, of which Professor Ferguson is chair of. And that's our main purpose of today's meeting, very much around resuming our aviation hearings, which we believe are hugely critical in terms of the reopening of not only the aviation sector, but Ireland Inc., tourism and business. So the purpose of the first part of our meeting is to discuss the recent report of COVID-19 Testing Group. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to reiterate our welcome to today's meeting, Professor Mark Ferguson, Director General of Science Foundation Ireland, Chief Science Advisor to the Government and Chair of the COVID Rapid Testing Group, of which we will be dealing with the report today. You are very welcome for agreeing to present this meeting at such short notice, Professor Ferguson. The first part of our meeting today will be for 1 hour before we suspend for a moment and recommence with our second set of witnesses from the travel agents of Ireland for the second hour of the meeting. Note and privilege. All witnesses are again reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or such a way as to make him or her or it identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statement are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It is imperative that you comply with any such direction. For witnesses attending remotely outside of the Leinster House campus, there are some limitations to parliamentary privilege and as such may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as a witness physically present does. Witnesses participating in this committee session from a jurisdiction outside the state are advised that they should also be mindful of domestic law and how it may apply to the evidence they give. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against the person outside the House or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would like to remind members of the constitutional requirement that members must be physically present within the confines of the place which Parliament has chosen to sit, namely Leinster House and our Convention Centre Dublin, in order to participate in public meetings. I will not permit a person, regrettably, I will not be able to permit a member to participate where they are not adhering to this constitutional requirement. Therefore, any member who attempts to participate from outside the precinct will be reluctantly asked to leave the meeting. In this regard, I would ask any member partaking via Teams that prior to making their contribution to the meeting that you would confirm, which is the natural procedure now, that you're on the grounds of the Leinster House campus. I now call on Professor Mark Ferguson to make your opening statement. Professor Ferguson, obviously we're time limited, so within 5+ minutes we'd ask you. So, Professor Ferguson.
So, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me. I will be very brief. Obviously, I was asked to chair a group of experts to advise the Minister of Health on rapid testing. Our report has been published and is available to you. It has a number of recommendations and is also a body of evidence and references within the report. By way of an opening statement, I'll just say that this is a very important and rapidly moving field. There are many new tests being developed, 1,000 or more under development, and there are many tests being approved by regulatory authorities around the world. Many countries have adopted rapid testing as part of their strategy, and the evidence base for rapid testing is also developing very rapidly. So probably the most efficient thing is for me to turn it over to questions for the members, and I'll do my best to answer those. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Professor Ferguson. We'll now move to our first slot, Fine Gael slot, Deputy Joe Carey. Deputy Carey, you have approximately 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and I want to thank you, Professor Ferguson, for appearing before the committee today. I've read your report. I'm very encouraged by its findings, its recommendations. If you look to other jurisdictions, we're behind the curve in Ireland. I strongly believe that we need to embrace this as a way to reopen our economy, our society, and to keep it open. And I think that's the main point. And if you look across to the UK, you can see that households can apply for 2 test kits a week. Millions of these test kits have been brought into the UK. I think we need to do the same here in Ireland. And, you've recommended that we move at pace on this, and I strongly endorse that recommendation and call on government to do just that, to make arrangements to put these recommendations into place. Obviously, there is movement in terms of rolling out pilots here. Simon Harris in the higher education sector has moved on it, but I see a real opportunity for Shannon Airport in this as a distribution hub, as a logistical hub for the delivery of test kits into our country and to distribute it across the country. In the UK, they have used Bournemouth Airport to do just that. And I think Shannon is very well placed to provide a leading role in the distribution of these kits. So, I just really, I want to ask you, in terms of, what's the difference between antigen testing and LAMP testing? I see there in your report, there's differences between them. If you could explain that to me, Mr. Ferguson.
Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Deputy. I'll do my best to explain the differences. So a rapid antigen test detects a protein on the virus, and it works where there is in the test kit an antibody that binds to that protein, and then that is linked to some sort of marker, whether it's a fluorescent marker or a gold marker, and it reads out as a little band. So in simple terms, a lateral flow antigen test is the name. It's basically detecting the presence predominantly of live virus, of proteins that are in the intact virus. And that's the basis of most pregnancy tests. So, for many years, you can walk into a chemist shop and buy a pregnancy test. It's a lateral flow test that works on those. The great thing about this is it means it doesn't require a laboratory or any special equipment. It's just a kit that comes, and you can do it yourself or you can do it under supervision. By contrast, LAMP testing requires a laboratory. But unlike PCR, it doesn't require very sophisticated equipment, and it doesn't require very sophisticated chemicals. It simply requires an oven. So you have reagents on the LAMP testing that you mix, and then you test the sample, and it reads out. It has to be done in a lab. It is slightly more accurate than a lateral flow antigen test. And it might be suitable, for example, for a large company, maybe with a few thousand employees, or for someone that has a laboratory facility, a very basic laboratory facility. So LAMP testing, for example, is being used in some of the universities in Trinity College Dublin for testing the students. It's faster than PCR. Excuse me, it's faster than PCR. It's slightly more accurate than lateral flow antigen testing, but in simple terms, it requires a dedicated person and a laboratory. Our report really focuses on the lateral flow antigen test, the antigen testing, because ultimately, as you have quite rightly said, Deputy, that means that people can do it themselves. I mean, you can be trained and you can do it yourself at home, for example, and then if you test positive, you don't go into work and you simply go and get a confirmatory PCR test from the HSE. And that's very much the strategy that the UK are pursuing, and other countries, Austria, in the United States, there are big programs underway as well, also in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, so on. There are countries that are really empowering their citizens to take ownership over their own health, test themselves, and if they test positive, to go for a confirmatory PCR. Tests are not quite as accurate as PCR. I mean, the false positive rate is about 1 in 1,000. So every 1,000 tests you do, you're going to get a positive that isn't a positive, that's actually a negative. And the negative results, in other words, where the test reads negative, but you're actually positive, that's of the order accuracy of somewhere between 50 to 80%. A really important thing that's in the report is you should only use validated tests. There's a list of those on the EU Joint Research Centre website. And those are tests that have been validated by at least one member state and in use by more than 2 member states and meet certain minimum specificities. There are certain commercial tests that don't work nearly as well as what I have articulated, but actually you shouldn't be using those.
Thanks,
you should use the ones that are on the validated list. Thank you.
Professor Ferguson, we've quite a long number of members coming in, so I'm conscious they roughly have about 3 or 4 minutes each, so I just be conscious, just time-wise. We want to get maximum information. Sure. I need to move on now to Deputy Darren O'Rourke. Deputy O'Rourke, you have 3-4 minutes max.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Professor Ferguson. I'll be brief. I'm conscious that you mentioned that things are moving rapidly. I'm looking back on a series of reports going back to 21st of October from HICWA, 19th of November from the ECDC, 16th of December from CDC, and it actually seems as if the technology might be moving, but policy and government response is completely static. I wonder if you have an opinion in terms of the delay in moving on antigen testing, and are you of the opinion that now is the time to act and we should act immediately? And I'm interested in your perspective in relation to how this technology could be used in the aviation sector. Do you think it is an option to use it for airline workers, for airport workers in the first instance? And then I noticed your recommendation B1.9, B2, programs of repeated rapid testing of essential workers who travel into the country. And this is the question I would really ask you to focus on. Do you see that as a realistic possibility complementary to PCR or in addition to PCR? We have a lot of people travelling into the country who are subject to a pre-departure PCR test within 72 hours, no post-arrival PCR test. I wonder, do you think there is a possibility for a pre-departure antigen test and post-arrival, maybe serial antigen testing that might meet the same quality standard, antigen versus PCR, serial testing versus one-off testing? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The answer is yes, we should act immediately. And let me focus on your question. So in the United Kingdom, the SAGE group, that's the Scientific Advice to Government, produced a paper. It's available on the gov.uk SAGE Minute website, where they modelled the effects of serial testing of travellers coming into the country and showed that that was as effective as quarantine. So what does that mean? It means that you issue, when somebody comes into the country, a traveller, bar-coded rapid antigen tests. So the barcoding is unique. So you know that you gave, say 10 tests uniquely to you. You didn't give them to anybody else. They're uniquely your test. And what those individuals do is they test themselves every day. So it's daily testing when they come in. They take a photograph of the barcode and of the test result, and that's loaded up on an IT system. And that then says this person has done the test and it's, let's say, negative. Okay, so they're okay to go around their business. If you don't turn in the test, so you forget to do it or you deliberately don't do it, then there's an automated reminder that comes to tell you to do the test, because people can forget. And then if you repeatedly don't do it, the IT system has recorded when you come into the country your telephone number and your contact details and so on, and somebody will pay you a visit to find out what's going on. So that was modelled for SAGE and shown to be as effective in isolating infectious individuals as quarantine, either at home or in a hotel situation. And it's my understanding that the UK are now piloting that. So I understand that that is in pilot at the present time. Our recommendation was about essential workers coming into the country. So these would be people coming in to fix a piece of equipment, or maybe to do an operation on a rare operation on a patient, or to treat somebody, or even you could think about people going to a funeral, situations where it would be very difficult for them to quarantine because they have to act immediately. And we were suggesting in those situations that you could pilot and you could see whether this serial rapid testing, they would need to be barcoded, you would need to have the IT system, but you could then think about that also in the longer term, and this is in the body of the report, not in the recommendations. But when you think about longer term, you know, when more people are vaccinated, maybe in a few months' time, this might be something for a number of people coming into the country. You could even think about giving it to everybody on a plane and having it. And the most important thing there is that numbers become quite important. So, you know, if most people do it, you're actually far better off than having a very small number of people do something else.
We'll allow the members to continue with. I'd ask members to follow on questions. This is about extracting the maximum amount of information from the research that Professor Ferguson has done. We'll now move to Senator Timmy Dooley. Senator Dooley, you have 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chairman, and to thank Mr. Ferguson for this comprehensive report. Just on the wider use of antigen testing, I've had contact from individuals who believe there's an opportunity to carry out antigen testing within the hotel experience. There's some concerns out there with the opening of hotels early next month, and the view that there will be some hesitancy by some who will be concerned about that mixing that takes place within a hotel environment. Do you see a role, based on your experience and your understanding of this element of testing, that there's a role in that environment, and could it form part of a building of confidence in people attending and participating in the activities that, you know, take place in and around a hotel? And second of all, from your experience about testing and the quality or the improvement of the antigen testings generally, do you think we can get to a point pretty quickly that we can dispense with mandatory quarantine, that, you know, antigen testing as a component of our overall testing, in conjunction with the rollout of the vaccine in other countries, and the rollout of and also the testing that has been done through PCR, that we could get to a point that we don't have to carry out this mandatory hotel quarantine, because it is a huge inhibitor towards getting the aviation sector back on track.
So thank you very much. So the answer to your question is yes, I do think that rapid testing will be very important in instilling confidence in people, for example, to go to a hotel, to go to a restaurant and so on. And it may very well be that hotel owners or restaurant owners voluntarily do this. I mean, speaking personally, I would feel a lot more confident about going in, say, to a restaurant or a hotel where I knew that everyone had been rapidly tested or tested previously. It's not perfect. There will be some mistakes, but it's an awful lot better than doing nothing. So I think it is important in terms of restoring confidence. I'm not sure I'd make it mandatory, but I do think that there would be a role for people there, for the business owners. In terms of mandatory hotel quarantine, I mean, that becomes a really interesting situation as travel begins to open up. And I think it's really important that we do these pilots soon and quickly. You know, the report talked about moving at pace. If you start with the essential workers, find out, you know, what the compliance is like, find out what the IT system's like, find out how easy it is to do, then you're in a very good position to think about whether or not you could roll this out more widely and potentially, as you say, dispense with mandatory quarantine. Variants are going to become very important, and variants come both from other countries as well as within our own country. They will be generated spontaneously. So testing, widespread testing, both of visitors and indeed of the indigenous population, is important to keep a handle on those variants.
And just how confident are you in relation to the variants and the sensitivity of the tests that are there at the moment? in terms of the picking up, and how quickly can the sensitivities of the kits be changed? I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of learnings over the last number of months, but how quickly can you adapt the testing to, I suppose, identify the variants that are now there?
Very good. So the existing tests will detect currently all variants, but they do not distinguish between them. And the reason for that is that the antibodies are detected at what's called the nucleocapsid bit of the virus. It's the bit that doesn't change much. So the good news is that the test will tell you whether the virus is there, but it will not tell you whether there is a variant. So the strategy would be that if you tested positive on an antigen test, you would get a confirmatory PCR and you would get sequencing of the virus and you would know what, if any, variant that was. So the trick behind the testing is twofold. Number one, it will allow you to screen an awful lot of people very quickly and very cheaply. And secondly, it will allow you to isolate them very quickly. That's the most important thing if you're going to substitute it for hotel quarantine, because you get the result in roughly 30 minutes. And if it's positive, you should isolate, those people should isolate until they get a confirmatory PCR, and then they should continue to isolate. So rapid isolation is the trick, and that's what allows you to substitute for quarantine. But of course, compliance will be important, and that's why I really believe we need to do these pilots at scale, get the data, see what it looks like, and see if it could be deployed more widely.
And final question, if I could, Chairman.
I'll have to. We are gone nearly 6 minutes. I'll allow you in at the end.
Are all antigen tests the same, or is there a standard?
A yes or no answer here, Professor, because I'm conscious of other members.
No, they're not, and the best ones are on the Joint Research Centre list.
Thank you. Professor Ferguson, can I just follow on? Number one, how long would it take to get a pilot scheme up and running? Number two, have you had interaction with government about setting up such a pilot scheme? Number three, do you believe that if you got a pilot scheme up and running and the barcode system was in place, and coupled with the vaccination programme now underway nationwide, including here, and with the digital Green Pass being looked at now by the European Commission, how quickly could you see antigen testing becoming the standard test in terms of pre and post departure for air travel in and out of Ireland?
So thanks very much. The testing pilots that I'm aware of are in the further and higher education sector, so they're in the university sector. Minister Harris is moving about, and I'm well aware of those. And I'm also aware of things taking place with employers in the general employment
my
sector.
Question is...
I'm not actually aware of anything in Ireland in the aviation sector. I do know a little bit about the pilots that are going on in the UK, but I don't know anything about what's planned in Ireland.
How quickly could a pilot be set up and the results concluded?
I think it could be done very quickly, because the obvious thing to do is to learn from the experience that the UK has, and there may be other countries.
Could it be done in a month?
Well,
could it be done in a month? 1 month?
I would have thought so, yes.
And have you had interaction with the government regarding your recommendations in your report, and specifically around with the Department of Transport and Aviation? And can you comment on the fact, with vaccination programme now very much underway with countries, how that feeds into your thinking around antigen testing in terms of air travel as being a pre and post departure test, linking it in with quarantine as well, so we can get the aviation sector back up and running in a safe way, health-wise?
Thank you very much. So the answer is no, I have not had any interaction with the Department of Transport regarding this, but very happy to help if they're
Professor, we will follow up with the department, asking them to interact with you with immediate effect on looking at doing a pilot around the aviation sector and antigen testing, and we can do it very much in the essential worker space, as you recommended in your report. And could you just follow on finally and give your comments around the vaccination programme that's underway with the digital green pass that's being proposed by the European Commission, and how do you think that would feed into antigen testing becoming the benchmark test for air travel? Obviously, where you have a negative PCR test, that negative antigen test, that would be followed up with a PCR test, which I think would be taken as a given. So can you just give your final comments around that area?
Okay, so let me just speak specifically about testing and then about antigen testing. So I believe that if an individual was vaccinated, if they had a test before they flew, a pre-departure test, either PCR or an antigen test, and if they have a follow-on test when they arrive, followed by some serial testing either every day or every 2 days.
Antigen testing.
That would be the antigen testing, yes. That would be a pretty good benchmark that person was relatively safe. So what do I mean by that? The antigen test determines whether or not you're infectious, whether you will pass on the virus. You're much less likely to pass on the virus if you're vaccinated. And if you are then in the rarer category where you are passing on the virus despite being vaccinated, you should pick that up with an antigen test. So when you combine those two things, I think you could be fairly safe that you would catch most people who would be infectious, and that would be a satisfactory regime. I emphasize no regime is perfect. There will always be one or two things, even with PCR, where people will slip through. But that's not the game we're in. The game we're in is about a numbers game. It's about trying to get most people to be not passing on the virus, to be safe. So I think the combination of vaccination and rapid testing will allow you to do that. And if you combine that with wearing a mask on the plane, then I think I would feel very confident.
Thank you, Professor Ferguson. We now move to Deputy O'Murray-Coe, Sinn Féin Start. 3 to 4 minutes, Deputy O'Murray-Coe.
Look, and here I'd like to thank Professor Ferguson. Look, this is utterly informative and necessary. And I'd agree with the fact that we need a pilot as soon as possible so we can actually bring this into being in an operational sense as regards aviation. Just very quickly, you spoke obviously about how PCR is more accurate. And obviously how you deal with that is by having more rapid antigen tests. How many make up for the deficiency? Let's say we're talking about what is the false positive 1 in 1,000 and what would be necessary? And if you have any indication in relation to those better quality tests, what would the cost be? You know, now, obviously it'd be a lot less costly if it's a release from mandatory hotel quarantining, etc.
Okay, very good. So I'll explain in some detail at the end the difference between the two tests, but in simple terms, if you can increase the accuracy of a rapid antigen test in the following way. First of all, training. So there are loads of videos on YouTube, but the best ones come from the UK NHS, in my opinion. And they teach people how to take the sample because that's where quite a lot of the inaccuracy is. So training people about how to take the sample, either self-training and so on. Then there's the accuracy of the test itself. And as I said, the Joint Research Centre in the EU has the list of very good tests. And then the third thing is, you know, the accuracy with which you read the result. And that's a simple thing. You know, you have to wait for some of the tests for 30 minutes. If you try to read it after 5 minutes, you might not get the right result. So again, that's about training. So that's the first thing. And then in terms of deploying them, serial testing really improves the accuracy. So in the workplace, we would recommend testing every 2 to 3 days. It's better if you test every day, and that's why we would recommend that for people coming in, say, on an aeroplane, that you would just test every day, do a test every day. But in the workplace...
Sorry to interrupt.
For an antigen test, yes.
Yeah, no, for how many days?
Good question. For the 10 days that you currently do for the quarantine, so it would be the same length of period, but instead of being in quarantine, you would just do a test every day. And clearly, if you tested positive, you would isolate, and if you were negative, you could continue around your business. And then the third thing is, if you get a positive test or a negative test, and you want to be sure, just do immediately another test. So the first thing to happen is if you get a positive test and you think, gosh, I'm not really positive, do another one. And if that one's positive, you can be pretty sure you're positive. You can go for a confirmatory PCR. So there are very straightforward things. The costs of the tests, they vary. The UK procurement, which is a public document, says that each individual barcoded test must cost less than £5. So that the UK is paying less than £5. How much less, I don't know. Maybe £3, I don't know. In normal kind of pricing, they're somewhere between €5 to €9. I guess it'll depend how many you buy and how you buy them and all that kind of stuff. But that's the order of the cost. So the cost is very low by comparison with PCR or mandatory quarantining or anything like that. They're relatively cheap.
So that's it.
Deputy Morocco.
Sorry?
No, and Deputy Morocco, final concluding remarks.
Yeah, no, so what you're looking at is something that could be 50, 60 quid that would obviously would make up for the deficiency in antigen testing because you're just doing it that often, and would give us, a roadmap that we could operate with. We need to look into this, and we need the pilot set up as soon as possible in relation to aviation. I think that's
Thanks,
just
Deputy
it.
Morocco. We'll now move to Fine Gael slot. Deputy Crowe, 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay, I haven't joined your party, but I'll use I presume it's a Fianna Fáil slot you're speaking of.
What did I say?
You said Fine Gael,
We're in coalition. Obviously, I'm moving ahead of the trend. My apologies. Freudian slip there, Freudian slip.
Well, doesn't the Taoiseach often get mistaken for the Taoiseach, so I suppose it all balances itself out. Listen, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Professor Ferguson, for joining us this afternoon. Look, I'm going to launch straight into it. I think there's a number of very compelling benefits and arguments to having rapid antigen testing. First of all, the cost factor, it's around €5 an antigen test versus a huge variance, anywhere from €30 in North Macedonia to €150 in Dublin Airport at the moment, or thereabouts for a PCR test. So there's a huge price variance. There's also the speed at which results come back. And then all of that obviously has to be juxtaposed with the accuracy of the testing that's actually coming back. So I've been looking in depth for the last number of weeks at the digital green certificate. And when this was first mooted, a lot of people expected that it would absolutely nail down that PCR test was the only way, and that was the only way of certification. And lo and behold, when the technical specification was issued last week, it did mention certification of antigen testing. So it paves the way in the months ahead as aviation gets back to some normality, that it won't just always be PCR testing. There is some space in the room for rapid antigen testing, and that needs to be looked at. So look, really what I want to come to you with is a proposal to see what you would think of this. Maybe our committee could then action on it, Chairman. I think the obvious thing is there's a space here at the moment, 5 or 6 lead-in weeks before the digital green certificate is operational throughout the Union. So right now, each member state is working pretty much off its own rules, for better or for worse. I think a logical way of trialling this could be to pick one route in and out of Ireland where you know who's going on the plane. Very few passengers, maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. And you allow them, I suppose, then to entice them, they wouldn't have to get a PCR test. They would try. It could be Heathrow to Dublin. We unfortunately don't have Shannon routes at the moment. It could be a in and out service, antigen tested, and we would see how that would go. And that could be trialled over these few weeks until we have the European-wide regime. What would you think of that, Mr. Ferguson, as a pathway to getting some normality back to aviation without breaking the bank for the passenger?
I think that's a very good idea. And I think your suggestion of doing it on a Ireland-UK route is particularly helpful because, as I said before, the UK are piloting these things and they have got the IT systems in place. So, if you picked an airline, I don't know, CityJet, Ryanair, Aer Lingus, whatever, that was on that route, I mean, you could use this as a substitute for example, home self-quarantining. And you'd need to collect the data. You'd need to see, that people did the test, that they reported the results. You'd get information on how many people did that and so on. So, no, I think your idea is a very good one. And I think if you did that, there's quite a lot of business people travelling at the present time, and people would volunteer, I suspect, to participate in that, particularly if you didn't have to home isolate. You would be allowed to go about your business, unless, of course, you had a positive test, in which case you would need to isolate and get a confirmatory PCR. So, no, I think your idea is a good one.
Deputy Crowe.
Thanks. Just to conclude, Chairman, I would formally propose out of today that go forward to the Department of Health and Transport on a trial basis for the next few weeks. I watched Sky News the other night. They were trialling a disco in Manchester and they were filming people coming in and out, and they used a sample of the population. We're talking about sampling potentially people going to concerts, matches, etc. So why not look specifically at it? This is probably one of the best ways to test it. A flight that has a very low carry load, maybe 10 or 12 passengers in and out of Ireland to the UK. Let's let the HSE monitor that, the efficacy of this, trial it, and this could very well be using the building blocks of Digital Green. This could be a pathway forward for Ireland, and I firmly propose that out of today's meeting, if there isn't dissent, that this become a recommendation now, not next month, but now out of our committee. Thank you, Chairman.
We'd already agreed to write to the Department of Transport that they would engage with Professor Ferguson and set up a pilot scheme. You've put the construct of what that pilot scheme should look like. So we'll include that as the recommendation. Other things may come up during the course of the meeting as well. But we've taken the decision here today already that we're going to be writing the department forthwith, immediately, asking them to set up a pilot scheme. Clearly the construct with looking at a particular flight over and back to the UK, as Professor says, where they have already the structures in place. Absolutely. But this needs to be done immediately. The fact that we've Professor Ferguson in here before us today, and there's been no interaction with the Department of Transport on a report that's groundbreaking, but very much straightforward. It's now a month old. This testing should have been going on for the last number of weeks. Now we still have sufficient time, so certainly we'll include that. Should be included as the construct around such a pilot scheme. So we'll move on now to the Green slot. Deputy Matthews, 4 minutes, Deputy Matthews. Deputy Matthews, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to go back to something that Professor Ferguson said at the outset about the SAGE report and the testing being carried out in the UK. Are the UK actually carrying out that testing at the moment? And could we actually just learn from any mistakes of what they're doing at the moment, rather than us proceeding straight away to a pilot here? Would that be a more effective way of assessing whether that serial testing would work? So are you aware of pilot scheme that's actually operating in the UK, has been operating for some time, to allow us to make an assessment on that? And can we get a report back on that? Or would that be maybe, Chair, for the committee to follow that line of inquiry, to learn from any mistakes being made in the UK? Thank you, Professor Ferguson, and thank you, Chair.
Professor Ferguson?
Thanks very much. I think you need to do both. So you definitely can learn from the experience of other people, and they will tell you things such as stuff that I've already told you about serial testing. But you also do need to do the pilot yourself, because you need to get the logistics in place, you need to get the IT system in place, you need to get the people within the health service executive or on the ground in whatever airport you choose in Ireland and so on. So there's two bits of it. There's the logistics bit, which you kind of need to do, and then you need to learn from other people. As far as I know, but I am not certain about this, so I repeat, I am not certain about what I'm about to say, the UK have commenced those studies. I am aware of the modelling work that was done for SAGE. I've read that report, it's in the public domain, and my understanding is that the UK pilots have just started. So this would be a very opportune moment to take part in those, for example, in the way that was suggested by the previous deputy, on a London to Ireland or a UK to Ireland flight. So that's the answer. It's both logistics and learning.
Chair, I think that's something we should try and pursue as this committee's work, to really work in tandem with the UK experience.
Yes.
It won't be that much different logistically and behaviourally, I don't imagine either. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson.
When we're writing to the department, Deputy Matthews, obviously it would be implicit that we'd be asking the department to link up with the UK. It should be an integrated approach, both with ourselves in the UK. There's benefits in terms of north-south. It's a collaborative process, and I would very much we'll build that into our request to the Department of Transport. I now move to Deputy Duncan Smith, Labour slot. Deputy Smith, you have 4 minutes. Deputy Smith.
Sorry, I was just having trouble unmuting.
You're coming in, yeah.
Thank you very much. Look, Professor Ferguson, I don't have much to add or indeed to question beyond what's been asked already, because what you've delivered in terms of your 50-plus page report is something that we have needed in this country for a number of months. It is a rigorous, strong academic paper on the advantages of rapid mass antigen testing, and this is something, as you know, your Chief Scientific Advisor to the Government of Ireland, that the Government of Ireland need to take on board forward. Our aviation industry needs a pathway out of where we are now, and they needed action weeks, months ago, indeed last summer when the initial report on aviation recovery was published. So we've always been behind the curveball on this, but we were told that antigen testing was not the gold standard. And unfortunately, PCR was the enemy of the good for so long in terms of government policy on this. But I think you've set out in detail how that can be ameliorated and how that can be managed and why there are such advantages to antigen testing. So I just want to thank you for your report. It needs to be taken on board. I commend the Chair for the urgency with which he has set out how we're going to deal with this as a committee. I think Deputy Crow's suggestion is a very, very good one as well, which I support and glad that's going to be included. Now, just in terms of a couple of airports that have used antigen testing, I'm thinking of Rome Airport, Istanbul Airport, and there are a number of others. Now, we had Rome Airport in a number of months ago in our own committee, but did you look at any further evidence of how their testing continued over the last number of months, and particularly through the winter wave, or was that outside the scope of your report? And I just thank you very much. I can't emphasise how important this is for our aviation industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Unfortunately, no, we didn't look in any more detail at those airports. I mean, that's something that someone else could do, but we did not do that.
Deputy Smith.
Look, I'd have nothing more to add, just than to heap further plaudits on the report and to give a boost to how much we need to implement this recommendation. So we're already over a bit of time, Chair, so I'll cede that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Smith. Now we move to the regional group. Deputy Michael Lowry. Deputy Lowry, you have 4 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Professor Ferguson. Since last January, I've been raising this at a political level, the necessity for rapid antigen testing. And to be quite honest with you, I've been baffled with the sluggish response from the HSE and from NEPID. And I think it's very regrettable that such a valuable tool in our battle against COVID has not been advanced. And I think the work of the committee today hopefully can do that. First of all, can you confirm that an antigen test detects both symptomatic and asymptomatic carriers? My position on it is very simple, that it's easy to perform, it generates rapid results, it's relatively cheap, and that it should be used in the construction industry, the hospitality sector, the retail sector, and indeed schools. And I am aware that here in Ireland, there is a pilot project underway in relation to construction, and many of our private companies are using antigen very effectively at the present time. So just one problem I have with it is that antigen testing is widely accepted across Europe. Already the UK have it advanced, Germany, France, Italy, all across Europe, they're placing huge orders with manufacturing companies of the antigen tests. My concern is that we'll end up like we did with the PPE gear at the start of this pandemic, where the manufacturing capacity will actually be full by the time we make a decision here in Ireland. I'm not at all happy with the delays in this. And I raised this with the Taoiseach last Thursday. And as part of his response, he said that, first of all, the government have endorsed your report. But secondly, he went on to say that there's differing opinions between scientists and public health doctors. Could you explain what that difference is, and can we get over that? And because what I find here is that the political will is there to roll out antigen testing, but there is a resistance from within NEPID and from within the medical profession at senior level to this being deployed. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. And I'll try and answer your question. So first of all, yes, antigen testing does detect both symptomatic and asymptomatic individuals. And in fact, it's really useful in mass testing for asymptomatic individuals, because if you feel perfectly well, you may not be motivated to roll up for a test anywhere. So that's really part of the advantage. I think I can't really tell you why people are resistant. You would need to speak to those individuals. But if you look at the data, I think you need to understand that a PCR test and an antigen test are about different things. So since this is a transport committee, people often talk about the PCR test as being the Rolls-Royce test. Well, the kind of analogy is, if you can't have a Rolls-Royce car, you shouldn't have any car. But that's nonsense. You know, if I wanted to travel over Africa, I wouldn't choose a Rolls-Royce car, I'd choose a Land Rover. If I wanted to be green and save the planet, I would choose an electric car, not a Rolls-Royce that burns so much petrol per gallon. And what that tells you is that it depends what question you're asking. So a antigen test basically detects infectious people. It detects an individual who's got a high viral load that's likely to have live virus and that is likely to transmit that virus to other people. And that's what you want to do. You want to remove those infectious people from the workforce or from the aeroplane or from general society, get them to isolate until they're not infectious, and then you stop the spread of the virus. A PCR test detects the nucleic acid of a virus, and that tells you when you've got a very, very small amount of virus that isn't infectious. It tells you when you're infectious, and it tells you when you're post-infectious. In other words, that you're way over having had the symptoms, but you still got some traces of the nucleic acid. So these are detecting different things. An antigen test will not tell you whether you ever had COVID. It won't tell you whether you're past COVID. It just tells you whether you're infectious at this stage. And it's that kind of mentality of equating a PCR test with an antigen test that is actually unhelpful. I mean, they're detecting different things. And then the second thing I will say is that any self-administered test, by definition, is less accurate than a professional test. But there's plenty of precedent for this. You can walk into a chemist shop and buy a pregnancy test and do the pregnancy test. And when you go to the doctor does another one when you're in the health service. So this is known. And as I said before, training is very important. There's plenty of good videos. It's very easy to do, taking the sampling. Reading the test is very important, and you can help that with a photograph. And then selecting the right commercial test kit. But of course, no test is positive. So there is about 1 in 1,000 false positives with an antigen test. There are false negatives as well. And you need to educate people about that. You need to tell them the test isn't perfect, but that's true of almost any test.
You might conclude that, Professor.
So I think
Professor
you just need to think about the different contexts of the tests.
Thanks, Professor. Okay. We'll now move to Senator Crockwell, the Independence Group. Senator Crockwell, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't be taking 4 minutes. Professor, thank you very much for being here today. Professor, the scientific dogs in the street have been screaming about antigen testing for some time. Noted broadcasters have been screaming about antigen testing. We brought it up in this committee. I brought it up in the Shannon. Antigen testing all over Europe for several months now. There has to be a gate blocker. There has to be somebody here who is preventing this moving forward. We seem to be constantly behind the curve on things like antigen testing. Very quickly, have you come up against resistance for your committee as you tried to progress this study? And secondly, the option put forward by Deputy Crowe, I fully support. But when we look at the Schengen travel area throughout Europe, there's clearly going to be an integrated travel scheme in Europe. And the Minister for Defence was talking yesterday about a mobile phone app that I would be able to bring to the airport, shine it before some card reader, and it would declare I had done my test and I was free to travel. And I just wonder, are you anyway aware how far advanced we are in the development of that app? That's all I've really got to say. Thank you very much for your time, and my colleagues have been very questioning of you. Thank you.
Professor Ferguson.
So thank you very much. So indeed, there are people who worry about the accuracy of a rapid flow antigen test. And, you know, it's the difference between, I guess, a diagnostic for an individual patient and a screening device for the population. You know, a screening device for the population has to be easy to use. It has to be cheap. It has to be very straightforward. It has to have a good degree of accuracy. I mean, in my opinion, 1 in 1,000 is an acceptable level for a false test. In some other people's opinion, it's not. They'd want it in whatever, 1 in 100,000. I mean, that's just a matter of opinion. So I think a lot of it, the worry is around the accuracy of the test. Another worry is people misunderstanding the test. So they believe if they get a negative test, they can go crazy. I mean, this is what's called a risk transfer sort of argument. And the same argument was made for condoms and was made for seat belts and all the rest of it. You know, the people are going to misbehave. I think that's not the way to look at it. I view antigen testing in the context that we're talking about it like a health and safety measure. So I would say if you wear a bicycle helmet and you're cycling a bicycle, do you ride the bicycle more dangerously than if you didn't wear the helmet? I don't think so. And it's the same sort of argument that's here. So those people who are worried about testing, they worry partly about the accuracy per se, and they worry about the potential behavioural changes that may occur after that. My personal view is that the public are very well educated. They know the challenges of COVID-19 and it's a terrible disease, and they know the problems of severe lockdown and restriction of economic and social activity. So I think if you explain to people that this is a screening tool, this is a way of trying to increase the safety of the population, as one of the deputies said earlier, to give people confidence to go back onto a plane or to a restaurant or to a hotel or to work. Yes, there will be some cases when it is inaccurate, and yes, you may be one of those unfortunate people where you get an inaccurate test. But by and large, it's much better than doing nothing. And by and large, it's much better than having a complete lockdown. I think most people will understand that. And I actually have a lot more faith in human nature that most people will not misbehave and they will do the test and they will comply. And we can't devise a system for a very small number of people who are obviously not going to work it the way that we would want. I think the vast number of people would, because they're keen to get back to their lives. That's clearly an opinion, and there are different opinions, and I guess I've tried to summarise what I see in terms of the opinion in this area. I would have to say that the tests are getting more accurate, and the weight of evidence behind using them is becoming ever more compelling.
Thank you.
Very quickly, one last one. The issue of pilot testing has come up here this morning. Pilot testing has taken place in most European countries at this stage and in the UK. Can we not just grab the bullet now and go for it? Pilot testing will only delay us even further.
So I think the answer to that question is yes, we should move very quickly. The only reason why I would recommend pilots at scale and at pace, which is what's in the report, is in order to get the logistics right. Okay. That's all.
Okay. It's really, it runs in parallel with establishing a system to operate. Yeah.
Exactly.
We'll now move to Senator Buttimer. Senator Buttimer, you have 4 minutes.
Good morning, and thank Dr. Ferguson for being with us. Dr. Ferguson, you are the Chief Scientific Officer of the government. Your report was published in April, but it was back in March 19 when it was submitted. What has been your engagement with government since then?
So thank you very much. I've had fairly extensive engagement across the higher and further education sector with Minister Harris and members of that department. And I've been involved in discussions about extensive pilots which are underway or are planned.
And that's just in education, correct?
That's in higher education, higher and
so
further. So
can I ask you, have you been engaged with, has NEFIT engaged with you, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Glynn? Has there been interaction with the Minister for Transport and the Minister with responsibility for aviation?
Very good. So transport and aviation, no. In terms of NEFIT and Ronan Glynn, yes, they have read the report and I have talked to them about it. And yes, I've also had interaction with commercial sector, with the Taoiseach, with IBEC and with commercial employers and companies.
What has the view been of NEFIT, Dr. Glynn and government regarding a pilot, which we all support?
So my understanding is that government has endorsed the report. and it's up to individual government departments to roll out parts of that report. Clearly, I have made recommendations, and I'm very happy to help or engage in any way I can be helpful, and it's down to those individual departments to roll out any recommendations.
In the putting together of a pilot, should you be involved, and who should be involved in the putting together of that pilot, whether it's in terms of a flight, a sporting event, or a nightclub, as in the case of the UK? And have you had any engagement with the NHS, or has government, do you know, have any engagement with the NHS regarding that pilot scheme?
Very good. So I think in terms of a pilot, you would want to have engagement with the relevant actors. So in aviation, you'd want the airline company, you'd want the airport staff, you'd want the HSE, you'd want those people involved. If anybody wants to ask me in terms of the knowledge, or any other member of the expert group, remember I only chaired that, then we'd be very willing to help. We did recommend, by the way, setting up an expert group for the knowledge. And in terms of the NHS, yes, I had very extensive interaction, as did the expert group, with colleagues there in terms of taking evidence and learning from their experience of the widespread rolling out of rapid antigen testing. So yes, in terms of gathering the evidence and support for the report, we have certainly done that.
And would you be of the view, if Ireland, which we hopefully will, sign up to the EU digital green certificate or green passport, would you be of the view that we should have a pilot in place before we do that? And are you supportive of that EU passport?
So the answer is yes, I am supportive of putting a pilot in place immediately. The report did say that we should do pilots at scale and as quickly as possible. And as I've explained before, that's mostly about logistics. It's a little bit about learning, but it's also about logistics and getting the right people involved. So I would be fully supportive of that. And yes, I am fully supportive of some form of digital passport that could incorporate vaccination status and testing. That's clearly been tried in Israel. It's clearly being tried in a number of other places. And it's going to be a way of understanding how to engage safely in activities that people want for the sustainable reopening of the economy and society.
Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for your work, Dr. Ferguson. Thank you, Chairman.
Professor Ferguson, if government were to ask you to head up such a pilot programme, particularly around, we'll say, aviation, is it a position you'll be willing to take up? You've made a recommendation in your own report for an expert group. If government were to approach you to head up such a group in a pilot programme, would you be willing to take up that task?
So that wouldn't be appropriate. I mean, I would be very happy to help in any way possible, and I'm sure any member of the expert group would be capable of doing that. I do have a job to run Science Foundation Ireland, and it's kind of important for the people involved, either in aviation or in hotel business, and the health HSE and the Department of Health to be involved. But I'm not shirking a responsibility. I'm simply saying there aren't enough hours in the day and it's not my job. But I'm very happy to help or advise in any way that could help with the assisting of setting up in such a pilot.
Well then, Professor Ferguson, your report is a great body of work. It's lied idle on the aviation sector for too long. Last month. I note on page 47 you make a specific recommendation about test release harm from unnecessary quarantine of asymptomatic critical workers, international travellers. So it is a recommendation. So we will be writing to the Department of Transport, who are the principal department on aviation, but I think we will also be writing to an EFID. We'll be writing to the Department of Health, the Minister for Health, and indeed the Department of Taoiseach and the Department of Taoiseach, as the urgency around this area to set up such a pilot programme with immediate effect, which really it's a pilot stroke rollout, because ultimately that happen in parallel, as you made it, to actually get the logistics in place. Just on one final point, what reaction did you get from Dr. Holohan and Dr. Glenn in terms of the view of NEFIT to your report? You didn't actually get a chance to answer that direct question. You might just elaborate, answer that, just enlighten us on that particular view.
So as far as I'm aware, the report has not been officially discussed at NEFA, though of course I have discussed it particularly with Ronan Glynn before Dr. Houlihan returned to work. And their view is that they see it as complementary. Their view also would be that it's up to line departments other than health to be implementing some of the recommendations. And indeed, you see a flavour of that in the recommendations in the report. I think the Department of Health are really focused on rolling out the vaccination programme, on looking at hospitals, GPs, and all the rest of it. And I think it's really for other departments, whether it's for education or whether it's for transport or whether it's for enterprise, to be taking the lead, but of course to be involving, where appropriate, the HSE. And, you know, the HSE is really involved in the confirmatory PCR test. Okay. So one of the interesting things about our recommendations are that you can do the antigen test, and then if you test positive, the confirmatory PCR is not just about getting a confirmation of the test, it's about bringing you within the governance of the HSE, because you're now within that system. And I think if you make that link, then that's how you will get health on board. They become involved at that particular point.
So really, in summary, Professor Ferguson, any pilot programme will really have to be with the Department of Transport as the principal department, will involve yes. NEFA, it will involve Department of Health, it will involve also the HSE. So we will write, obviously, now, and very much we thank you for coming in short notice. This has been a most informative session from you, and you've given of your valuable time. And so what we will now is we will write to the Department of Transport and the Minister for Transport in particular. We will also obviously write to the various other bodies, as we named, check the Department of Health, Minister for Health, the Minister for also NEFIT, the HSE itself, and Department of Taoiseach, who are coordinating all things around COVID. And what we really want to see is a pilot programme established with immediate effect, very much on the model where they would look at specific routes vis-à-vis the UK, work with the UK and their pilot scheme, so that when the Green Cert is up and running, that we as a country are not left on the runway. We're flying with the other countries as well. So with that, Professor Ferguson, thank you very much.
Chair,
yeah.
Apologies about this. Just very quickly, see in relation to the SAGE material that that Professor Ferguson spoke about earlier, is all of that available online? Because I know there are a number of papers. Because see if it isn't, we would need that extra information and also the detail as regards the IT systems, etc. If he would have that and we could get that as a committee, that would be brilliant. Or do we need to go and seek that?
Professor, it's online, and I'll send the reference to the clerk.
Okay, and Professor Ferguson, obviously you work with our committee in any way that necessary. We see you as a hugely valuable asset in terms of dealing with COVID and very much reopening the aviation sector and the economy. Thank you very much, Professor Ferguson.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will now suspend for a couple of minutes to allow the second half of the meeting to be set up. Thank you all very much.
Do we have to leave here, Chairman? Do we?
No, I have to leave here for 5 minutes.
Do we have to leave do we have to re-enter again?
Do we have to re-enter again? Yes, yes. Correct. Okay. You all have to de-check and come in again. Thank you all very much. Thanks.